Hello, guys. Welcome to Melanated Learning with your host, Yordi Solomon. Today I have with me Mrs. Bemnete Casa and Mrs. Heldana Shamelis. Thank you guys for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you all.
For having us. Yes, thank you.
So today, like we like to do on our podcast weekly, I decided to read a novel for the week, and I decided to read Miss Elizabeth Keckley's Behind the Scene. I did give the girls a little rundown on the novel before starting the podcast today. But for those of you who don't know and are just popping in today for the podcast, Elizabeth Keckley wrote her novel wrote her autobiography, Behind the Scenes. And the book was published in 1868, and her book recounts her life from enslavement to freedom. But what's really important, what we'll also dive into a bit today, is that Miss Elizabeth Keckley was Mary Todd Lincoln's seamstress. So she did not have I guess you can call it typical upbringing like most slaves had. She did get brought into the eye of the wealth and the public by being Mrs. Lincoln's right-hand woman. With that being said, I'm really excited to kind of dive into the novel with you all, talk about a few key things that we felt that stuck with us after I discussed with them, and just go from there. So the first thing I believe we're all itching to dive into when I first debriefed the novel to them was, if you ladies recall, Miss Elizabeth Keckley calls Lincoln the Moses of my people, which it was drawing a direct connection between his leadership and the hope that he symbolized for African Americans, specifically during the Civil War time. And I do want to preface by saying the three of us are Orthodox Christians, so I think this is why this is a little bit of a hard one for us to discuss. Did anyone want to kind of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, no, this one kind of hit close when you said that. I was like, okay, it's a very interesting person to use. And I think our keyword here is perceived, how the community of enslaved people perceived Lincoln to be. Moses being a very important person in the Christian faith, overall, across all denominations of Christianity. It's very interesting that she decided to use him as the comparison. That means that they saw Lincoln in such, they had him in such a high pedestal,
right?
And
such high regard.
the parallels that we see between him and Moses, I think she's trying to say how, Moses died before he could touch the promised land, and Lincoln died before he could see all the slaves freed. And as we know now, though, that wasn't going to happen in Lincoln's lifetime. I don't think he would have been there to see that.
And I think it's really important to note, like we do in class all the time, like we would do, is knowing your role in something, or your role in society. But like when reading something like this, so like as a Black woman myself, I'm reading this thinking, so when this was written originally in 1860s, Elizabeth Keckley was trying to write toward, or to gain a population of white people reading her novels and to get a better understanding. Whereas now, modern day, we're sitting here, 2024, African-American women's diving into this book. We know what Lincoln truly did and the truth behind it. But I think it's so important that to know also, in this time of the novel, he's symbolically being related to Moses in the sense of, like you said, bring these people to freedom, bring these people to a promised land, which is a promised land promising freedom. But it's not really diving into the deeper fact of what am I trying to say? I'm doing a lot of word jumping. What exactly was it that Lincoln did for our people, like Moses did, where like we could like sit here and like fine line out what Moses did for his people? What did Abraham Lincoln do? And I will say, like, as somebody who fully read the novel, this didn't get talked about because the main focus was on Mrs. Lincoln and not Mr. Lincoln. But this Elizabeth only talked about him right before his death, right before the chapter about his assassination. So it was interesting, it just felt like she was throwing it in there to kind of make you feel a bit of sympathy, make you understand. But like we know now that Lincoln was not the man that he was said to be in history. So
yeah, I think it's also very important to note just how important Christianity was to slaves at the time as well, and to be able to confidently make that comparison just kind of really puts into perspective for us how highly she saw Lincoln's essentially impact on history forevermore. Right. It's a pretty high figure in the religion for her to be able to make a comparison to. So it also just kind of really puts into perspective what she believed his impact on African Americans would be.
Right. And I think it's also hard, like in Elizabeth's case, like you guys don't know, but being the seamstress of his wife, like she knew everything from whatever drama they had going on as a married couple with Mr. Lincoln. Like she knew another side of President Lincoln that other people didn't know at this time. So I think it is fair to hear this comparison coming from someone like her rather than anybody else. However, I just think there was so much more that, like, when we talked about in that we won't get into, unfortunately, today, but like in later parts of the novel, we talk and we discuss about why we think that Elizabeth Keckley has some form of Stockholm syndrome, because like, I mean, just truly picking it apart, think about becoming an enslaved African-American woman, a young woman who knew nothing but slavery her whole life, getting put in the position to be I guess a wealthier, I don't know even, how would you describe that? Not a wealthier slave, but like a higher regarded slave, and like being seen different, being appreciated differently, but, oh, where was I going with this? But like, and her loving where she's at, but like when, at the end of the novel, it goes back into like where she truly came from, and you see like, okay, is this a form of Stockholm syndrome where she feels this just because she's around these people, they show her love, they give her food, she has shelter, unlike many other slaves, and this kind of comes out again, is like she is putting him to such a high regard. To say Moses, it's like, how are you saying that about somebody who literally has you enslaved at the end of the day? So, which leads us to our next topic of race and class. And I really wanted to talk about this just because this is a more broad theme of the book. Obviously, Keckley gives her readers a glimpse into the complicated dynamics between race, class, and gender during her time. I absolutely loved that I was able to get you two specifically on the podcast today, because like, as African-American women, we would have been her. If this was us back then, we would have been her. This would have been our position. So it's very interesting to see. But she was a free Black woman, like you all know, in a deeply segregated racist society, but was still able to access spaces that typically were reserved for wealthier white women. So obviously, yes, this was due to her career, if you want to call it that, as a seamstress. But I don't know. I think it's so many complex realities that come from that, and I just wanted to dive into that because I feel like we can talk about that and bring that into like modern day society and how we feel about that ourselves. So it's kind of an open question, open discussion, and we can, yeah. Does anyone have anything to say?
I mean, I immediately, reading this, just thought of the movie that just came out, Wicked, and like how essentially there are parallels that are quite blatantly obvious here, actually. Elizabeth Keckley being a essentially free Black woman in a deeply segregated and racist society, how that parallels with Wicked itself is Elphaba, who is also othered for essentially her race and being, but also has access to higher parts of society, being that her father is a governor and that her sister isn't racially stigmatized. She gets access to these different places, and the nepotism, if you will, that her father gets to play at hand for the education of her younger sister, and in that she's essentially following along with her sister, so she gets access to higher parts of society, and then in turn eventually gains access to, or just eventually just becomes somebody who is no longer stigmatized simply because of a friendship that she gains with a woman called Glinda, and immediately is accepted into society. I thought that was really interesting.
No, that is definitely like an exact parallel too, and I like what you just said towards the end, like, although like you're saying, I think they're friends, right? In the movie, it's a friendship.
Yeah.
Or is it sisterhood? Like sisterhood, but
yeah, Elphaba's father is a governor, and her sister, her younger sister, she is told to care after. So anywhere that her sister needs to go, Elphaba goes with her, and through that, she went to a university where she meets Glinda, who's even higher.
Gotcha. No, literally, because even like this again is not like a familial relation. Like, it's two completely different people coming from two completely different walks of life. Excuse me. But to your point at the end, oh my god, I'm completely blanking.
About how her friendship with her gets her into those positions.
Yes, about that specifically, where oh, sorry, I got a little notification on Zoom. Sorry, we got 10 minutes anyways, but it's okay. Yes, about like her friendship, and that's towards the end of the novel. We do see that where Elizabeth, because of her position as a seamstress with obviously Mrs. Lincoln, but then later on, because she was put in these positions where people knew her as a seamstress for Mrs. Lincoln, loved the dresses she was making, like people wanted these things, aspired for these things, even governors' wives, mayors' wives, and like this after the death of Mr. Lincoln, and she was getting people who wanted her services, and like where this was never going to be the case for this woman as an African American. No matter, her skills would have been her skills, being able to make these dresses, but she's being reached out to by wealthy white women to make dresses for her, and they were willing to pay her and all these things. Like, would not have happened if it weren't for Mrs. Lincoln, excuse me. But just as like you were saying in the movie, I know we are running low on time, but I do want to leave some space to still talk about this a little more. So, Mudai, did you have any, or Hildana, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, just a little bit. I think I was thinking about, it was interesting that you said that Stockholm syndrome a little bit, kind of also came to mind, not in the strongest way of it, but kind of how, in the movie Wicked, Glinda kind of takes Elphaba under her wing and then almost expects her to like expects Elphaba to listen to her advice and like take everything that she says and run with it because she knows what's best.
Right.
And because she's the whole reason that Elphaba is accepted by her schoolmates. I think it makes the reality of like slavery and racism and segregation and all of that kind of digestible in a way where people can see it as something completely other to us as just humans, because it's fictional and it's a fantasy land and it's made up, so but the problems are all there and they're very real and looking you in the face, and it's almost like you can see it when it's happening like this, but when it's happening in real life, people are very adamant against, oh no, that's not us. As a country, we're here for freedom and equality and all that.
No, I think you hit it perfectly. You hit it on the pin. I think was saying you hit it with that. No, truly, because, and we've talked about this again about this novel in class before, where or in other novels we've read throughout the semester, where the way, because these are 1900s, 1800 novels that we read, the way that these novels were written back then were so in a way that it was digestible for white people to understand the experiences of African Americans, whereas now we're reading, and like me being somebody who in my century now, living now in 2024, still experiencing some of these things, just maybe at a much micro level or whatever the case may be, however, still experiencing them. But like you said, we see this in movies, we see it in our day-to-day lives, we see it in everything still, no matter what. We talk about again all the time in class, the angry black woman, every stereotype that a black woman has to face to, I guess in this case specifically, make it in her career, make it in any social setting is not right. But I think all in all, like the Elizabeth Keckley's behind the scenes, it's just not a story just about her life. I think because she shows so much, and through the lens of religion, through a lens of her accomplishments, through the lens of her relationships with people, we see what it was like for her in the 19th century America, but we're still able to relate it to our current day-to-day life. I'm glad that I got the opportunity to sit here and like give a little time. I wish we could talk about this so much more, because there's so much more to dive into about this novel, but I'm glad we were able to address a little part of it and give Elizabeth Keckley the respect that her novel deserves. I wanted to appreciate both of you for making time to talk with me today and be on the Melanated Learning Podcast. And I'll see y'all next week.